Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday, and it is a very somber day here in the United States. This is the day that George Floyd is being laid to rest in Houston after his life was abruptly snatched from him by Minneapolis police, taken by people who had trained, who had also taken an oath to protect everyone, whether they were black or white. We're going to bring you details of Big Floyd's private funeral, his emotional homegoing ceremony. We'll have all those details just ahead for you. Plus, for days, we've seen the graphic images of George Floyd's death. And we have seen people come out and share their own stories of violence fueled by racial discrimination and what they are suffering as they try to go about and live their lives here in the United States day after day. But we're wondering what the impact is of all of this trauma. What does it do to people to be constantly targeted because of their skin color? We're going to be talking to an expert about all of that. Plus, innovation at its very finest. A group of self-taught engineers in Mali answer the government's call and step up with an innovation to help in the fight against COVID-19. All of that and so much more just ahead. Let's get started. So today is the day that George Floyd is laid to rest in Houston. It is a day where family and friends gather to mourn him. It's his final stop after he so brutally and tragically lost his life on the streets of Minneapolis on Memorial Day after a police officer knelt on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. His death was captured on camera, and it has gone on to capture the attention of people right around the world. And we've seen protests break out here in the United States. In Minnesota, where he died, the governor has called for a moment of silence, a statewide moment of silence, to last the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that George Floyd was pinned to the ground under the knee of ex-officer Derek Chauvin. The memorial, which is taking place in Houston right now, is limited to 500 people and will end with a horse and carriage that will carry George Floyd's body to the Houston Memorial Gardens, where he'll be laid to rest alongside his mother. While the services is private, is limited to this number of people, it is being streamed online right now. It is indeed a very sad day as we take in the scope of this tragedy. And for days, we have seen tens of thousands of people take to the streets across cities here in the United States. And then just last week, we also saw something else. We saw people around the world come out also. We saw people come out from Paris to New Zealand, South America, and in London. People coming out to express solidarity with the family of George Floyd, to express their outrage at his brutal killing, and also to draw attention to the discrimination that is taking place in their own countries. This past Sunday, people took to the streets of London. We saw people there for a protest organized by Black Lives Matter. They gathered in defiance of the government ban on large gatherings, but as the organizers see it, police brutality is a greater threat to the lives of Black people than COVID-19 is, and so they gathered. They gathered in large numbers, and when you take a step back and you look at George Floyd's death, it certainly lends credence to what those organizers are saying in London. Floyd himself had just recovered from coronavirus back in April, only to lose his life at the hands of police brutality a few short weeks later. Joining us now to talk about why they're taking to the streets in London and also the experiences of being Black in the United Kingdom is one of the co-organizers of the Solidarity protest there in the UK and what happened on the weekend that I was just telling you about. Tash joins me now from London. Not only did she organize the protest on the weekend, but she's also behind at least 8 other gatherings across the UK. And she joins us now to tell us more. Tash, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
It is good to have you with us. So in your own words, explain to us why you felt compelled to get involved and galvanize people to come out of the streets of the UK?
I think it was, so me and my friend Ima kind of saw what happened with George Floyd, and we just felt it resonated with us a lot. And I think a lot of people thought what happened to him was horrible. It just made us realize in our own country that we face, discrimination and racism, and we wanted to show not only solidarity, but a way that we could move forward in the country and raise awareness that it's not just happening overseas, but it is also happening in our own country, whether people like to admit it or not.
We'll come to the kind of the authority response in a second, but in terms of the numbers who came out or that came out, how surprised were you by the crowds that filled the streets?
I think from when we first decided to do it, we didn't realise it was going to catch as much wind as it did. And then when it came to the actual day, I think there was like about 15,000 people. And like for two young girls, obviously that's more than we ever would have expected. But it was honestly so amazing to see like so many people coming out and supporting us and supporting the cause and like fighting for Black Lives Mattering. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a very big statement that has happened, and we can't slow down because we've already made such a statement, and we still have more to do.
Let's talk about the problem. First of all, talk to me about what the problem looks like in the UK. Of course, there's significant differences between the UK. I was born in London. I grew up in London. I live here in the United States. So, I'm pretty aware of obviously the differences between police officers being armed here versus there in different ways. So talk to me about what the problem of police brutality looks like in the UK, and generally how widespread is the issue of racism in your experience growing up in England?
So I think with police brutality, as much as people, want to throw like facts and figures at you, like, oh, more white people are like killed in like whilst being detained, but number one, no one should be dying whilst they're being detained. But number two, if, Black people only make up 3% of the population in the UK, and the numbers of how many people are dying are nearer to the numbers of white people there are, and white people are 87% of this country. So if we were to be the same, the numbers would be disproportionate anyway. And I think it's really hard for people to grasp that racism is so ingrained in so many things that are in the UK that they're not very aware of it, and they don't like to take accountability of it. But when it's, from my perspective, having grown up like just outside London, home county, most of the people that I knew were white, it's been a long time to kind of like unlearn all the kind of stuff that people put on you, and like realize that you like have value like as yourself as a person, and like see that people are being unfairly treated that look like you, and to raise that awareness. Like it might only be 3% of us, but 3% of us still live in the country, and we still should be seen as people living in the country, and we shouldn't have to face this kind of discrimination and racism.
And 3% that are contributing and working and helping build the country. Let's not forget that. So as you talk about your reality and what you've experienced, and then we take in what government officials are saying. A number of people in recent days have come out and pushed back against the notion that the UK is racist or that it's systemic. Why do you think not just people in positions of authority, I don't think that's accurate. Why do you think so many people in authority or not have issues with actually facing the reality of the issue of racism there in the UK?
It's a really complex thing to kind of talk about, because as much as I have tried to explain to people like on a very basic level about it's not calling me the N-word in the street, like that's not just racism. It's so, like I said, it's so ingrained in a lot of things that we do that it's very hard for people to see it, because they're so used to it, and they're so normalized to it, and I guess desensitized to it. So it's a lot harder for them to kind of be like, whoa, take a step back, like I'm a racist, how can I unlearn that? And said like, so instead they kind of deflect and like, there's no way I can be racist, I'm not racist, I've got black friends and all this kind of stuff. And like, that's not really an excuse. You can still have black friends and you can still be racist. Just because you tolerate one person doesn't mean you tolerate the whole race. tolerate. It's a pejorative word anyway. I don't like the word tolerate, but just for in terms of like trying to make a point, I think it's gonna take a lot, because especially in the school system in this country, you're not taught about, you know, the fact that in the 60s they asked loads of people from the Caribbean and the West Indies to come over and help, you know, build the country. And then with the whole Windrush scandal, with them all being sent back, and people don't understand, like, oh, how is that racism? I was like, well, you can't invite people to your country to help them and then deport them. It doesn't make any sense. People that have spent their whole lives in Britain being sent away doesn't really make any sense. I'm a British citizen. I was born here, but I just happen to be black. It doesn't make me any less British than someone who's store because I live in this country. I just think that British people have a really fixed idea on what Britishness is.
That's
true. I think to kind of understand that Britishness is filled, like, has influences from so many different countries. Like, now if we have a look, you know, grime is like one of the biggest you know, music genres in the country, and that is predominantly black. So you can't have, you know, you can't take one aspect from a culture and completely ignore the rest. So you have grime music, that doesn't mean anything because we're still being systematically oppressed. Just because you use black people for entertainment doesn't mean that they're being viewed exactly the same way. And I think it's really difficult for people to kind of understand that.
And of course, you know, we can all just go back to the recent events surrounding Meghan Markle, you know, joining the British royal family, and the treatment she got, and you know, you could lay it side by side with the treatment that, you know, Kate Middleton received, right? And you can see the vast differences in the way they were treated, and the assumptions and the projections placed on Meghan Markle. I mean, people felt that moment was going to be, you know, or people felt that the moment was significant and that the UK had made huge strides to see someone like Meghan Markle, you know, enter the British royal family. Now that she's left, effectively, and moved to the States with Harry, I mean, how much is that, you know, how much is that kind of itself, in addition to these processes, blown open the kind of the hypocrisy around race in the UK?
I think even because Meghan Markle was like mixed race, like not even completely black, and they still had so much prejudice against her just because of like that she wasn't white. Do you get what I mean? And I think it's very hard because in Britain, I guess it's been ingrained for such a long time, these kind of values, that people don't understand what they're doing is racism. So it's up to like my generation to kind of speak to the older generation, be like, we're not tolerating this anymore. And I think the fact that two young girls have been able to do so much kind of just shows that like our generation is the one that won't be silenced, and we're going to be the ones to make sure that there is effective change. And like I've already been speaking.
What does that look like? What does effective change look like? I mean, what are you calling for specifically? Because again, as you know, having, you know, been looking at this situation for a long time and obviously watching the rest of the world, people call for change, but not necessarily even the steps, but for you, what should that look like? Where do you want to focus your attention?
So I think our focus of attention is kind of like, I think it's more education, because that's going to be the first place that people kind of, especially younger people, are going to be able to learn about, you know, what actual British history is like and what actually has happened, not just about World War I and World War II and like having Churchill as the hero. You need to understand all sides of history to be able to get, you know, an unbiased kind of opinion on it. And I think that's probably going to be where we try and like focus our energy into. Obviously in Bristol they pulled down the statue, and they've been trying to pull down loads of different statues as well, which is obviously amazing, and it opens eyes.
He's going to do that. He's going to take down these statues and any kind of emblems that celebrate slave owners and British past in its ugly form.
Yeah, I think because obviously people didn't know who they were before they were being pulled down, and I think having them pulled down is making people realise like, oh wow, we've glorified so many people that have caused a lot of hurt to people that do live in this country, and that, you know, have added to our economy and like benefited of like those different things. So like if you want to be a country that's got 66 million people, you have to cater to all those 66 million people. You can't bring people to a country and then remind them of all the things that, you know, that you did to them before that they got to this country. So I think pulling down the statues is amazing, but also we want to speak to people in Parliament and kind of be like, well, how many black people have you got working in Parliament? Like, how many black people have you got working in so-and-so? How many ethnic minorities have you got doing this and this and this and this? And I think we need a fair representation of like who is in this country and what we are doing in this country. And I think we've done really well to kind of get to this point, but it's just about figuring out the next steps and like how we're going to do it professionally and how we're going to make sure it's actually effective change. So in the next 10 years, we can say, wow, this is completely different from when I was like 10 years ago, and we can see the difference. And when people are learning and unlearning and, you know, getting to a point where everybody's kind of equal. Equality.
Equality, and feels welcome and valued and safe. Mm-hmm. Tash, thank you for joining us and just taking us behind the scenes and your thinking and what comes next. It's important that we have young people like you in the UK that are forcing the change to happen, and so keep doing what you're doing. It's important for not just the UK but for the entire world. So thank you, Tash. Be safe.
Thank you.
Take care. Well, it has been made very clear that here in the United States there are two pandemics at play. There is COVID-19, which we've talked a lot about openly and for many, many days. And there's also another disease that is running rampant, and it is that of racism, white supremacy. It is about the systematic discrimination of Black and brown people here in this country. COVID again appeared on our radars towards the end of last year, fully taking center stage this January. But that other disease of racism and the harming of Black people, that is centuries old here in the United States and dates back before the formal acknowledgement or birth of this country. So how do you deal with it? How do you dismantle something like that has seeped into the thoughts and bloodstream and the culture of a place? And how do you heal from the pain that has been caused by it? We have a very learned individual here to help us grapple with these questions now. Dana E. Crawford is a psychologist and the founder of the Crawford Bias Reduction Theory and Training. She joins us now from Maryland. Dr. Crawford, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for using your platform to give voice to this pandemic that's racism.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. This is an important conversation. Let me ask you, first of all, what you've made of the last almost 2 weeks now, following the emergence of that video of George Floyd being killed on a Minneapolis street. There is so much pain, so much anguish that I've seen and felt. What stands out for you when you look at the reaction from the Black community here in the United States?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. You know, none of these images are new. What is new is that we have now the technology to prove the things that we've been saying, not for years, not for a decade, but for centuries, right? And so that's very clear. But what is unique in this moment is that the entire world has been on pause. You know, outside has been closed. And so with COVID, it created this perfect storm of proof that we've had and the attention to actually dissect and lean into that proof. And so I think what has happened in terms of the response from Black folks and how we've navigated is now we have our proof and we're exhausted and we're tired, but we're not too tired to say, look, we told you this is what we're going through. And I'm seeing my white brothers and sisters and non-binary siblings recognize that because now they have the time to pay attention.
With the video, as you said, the reality of the violence wrought on Black and brown people in this country is known, and Black people can speak freely of it across generations in families, right? And with this video, once more, we saw this kind of outpouring and the sharing of people's experiences. Sharing is good, talking is important, you know, and I know someone like yourself in your field would say that people need to talk and get it out. But have you had any concern in this moment that with all this talking, there is a re-traumatizing that is taking place?
Of course, I dare not say re-traumatizing for some people. I think folks that are new to understanding this pandemic, they are receiving their first level of trauma. I think for us, we have generations of trauma. The epigenetics, this is how your DNA changes due to trauma. I have epigenetic trauma from my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. But I think for folks that this is new for them, absolutely, watching a recorded murder over and over again is highly traumatizing. I actually think that it is not healthy for people to rewatch these images with a multitasking approach. So you're looking at your phone and you're cooking dinner and you're watching these images. Instead, in the same way that when we do the Pledge of Allegiance, there is a pause, there is a stop, the entire energy around stops. That is how these videos should be viewed. There should be forewarning. Everyone should sit, brace themselves, and then watch it. When I chose to watch the video, I knew in the morning, I'm going to watch this video tonight. All day long, I did some self-care, and then I picked the time that I would watch it where my house was quiet. I grabbed a beverage and I processed it. And then afterwards, I engaged in some self-care. So sometimes I think for Black people, we are very skilled at keeping it moving. You know, we don't let trauma slow us down, or we wouldn't do the things that we've done. But right now, what I'm inviting us to do is to actually feel what we're experiencing, process it, and then reflect on what are some healthy next steps that will help us heal from this pandemic that is racism.
The video aside, the day-to-day experiences for so many Black people in this country is one of microaggressions and some far greater obvious displays of violence and discrimination due to our skin color. What you mentioned epigenetics just then. What does that do to one's sense of self, one's ability to be healthy, to form healthy relationships, to build a healthy community? What is the impact of that accumulation of, abuse, really?
Actually, yes, you're absolutely right. You know, when you summarize, like, of all of that, it's abuse. And so it does a couple of things. The first thing on an epigenetic level is we start to transmit, our DNA changes, and we have trauma in our DNA. But the other thing that it does is it causes inflammation. It causes fatigue. You know, the old adage, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Microaggressions are coined death by 1,000 paper cuts. But the flip side of that is it builds resiliency. I think that we are some of the strongest beings on this planet. I saw a video that it said, thank goodness Black people want equality and not revenge. I think that we have, lived in spaces and ways that we've had to learn higher and more evolved ways of forgiving and being able to still engage people that have said ridiculous things to us in the workplace, from our friends to our relatives, like all of the things we've had to deal with. And yet we are resilient. But I think it's important that if we're building resiliency, we take the time to pause and have self-care. In this world that attacks the Black body, self-care is activism, is a revolutionary act. And I invite Black folks for us to take care of ourselves. If you need a nap, Take yourself a nap. If you need to put some cream on your face and do a manicure, do a manicure. Like that, taking care of the Black body is revolutionary these days. And so I invite us to do that and then focus on resiliency.
Yeah. We are the victims and infected by this racism, right? It infects us, it causes us harm, but the perpetrators are also infected.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a moral violation. It's a human violation. That's why it's a pandemic. It's not a Black problem. And the reality is, Black people, we're very multicultural and multiracial. You know, it's not, I don't think anyone these days doesn't have another member of their family that is from a different race, a different ethnic group. Our children are different shades than us. And so this is a human condition. And I think for white folks, and I don't want to just lean the conversation into white and Black, there are brown, Black, tan, yellow folks that are also part of this conversation, and anti-Blackness is present in all spaces. And the reality of this is when you have racism towards someone, you have a prejudgment, you have a bias towards someone, and you act on that, and you are striving to be a good person in this world, it's a moral violation. And that moral violation, for some people, they lean into guilt and they check out. What I invite you to do is have the courage to know that if you live in a privileged body, no one is killing you because of the body you live in. And so the very least you could do is to acknowledge your guilt and engage in some action steps to systematically reduce your bias, prejudice, and racism. And that's what the Crawford Bias Reduction Model.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's 3 steps. It's about awareness. And that's what we all know. If you've gone to any multicultural, read a diversity book, read an article, you know about awareness. That's the critical piece. But then once you know, the next piece is doing an investigation to understand what triggers your racism, bias, and prejudice. And then how does it show up in the world? When you have racism, prejudice, and bias, do you become really withdrawn and pretend like it doesn't happen and you lean into the myth of equality because all things are not equal, things are not fair all the time? Or do you become really superhero mode and you're trying to rescue people and you're overcompensating and you're texting all your Black friends and you're asking them, can you buy them dinner? Or are you moving against and you're leaning so much into the particularities of protesting and you're calling it rioting as if you forgot the Boston Tea Party existed and the foundations of this country. And so that's how it may manifest. The next piece is leaning into reducing. So it's awareness, investigation, and reducing your bias and the impact. The reducing part is called let up. And the let up is listening to what triggers you, empathizing, not with someone else, but with your own pain so you can be empathetic to someone else. And then telling your story. What is your journey? Then it's understanding the larger context. And lastly, providing education, psychoeducation, that's the up part, realizing that you do not collude with racism, prejudice, or bias, and you are making a stance. I am an anti-racist. In any places that racism shows up, I got some beef for racism. I'm going to say no racism. You are not allowed here. And that's what it means to really reduce your bias, racism, and prejudice.
I mean, it's fascinating to hear you lay it out like that. Does it work?
Yeah. So how does one evaluate if it works? Do I think that people become less racist? Absolutely. Do I think that racism eradicates? No, because racism always defends itself. It's very clever. And I think about the world pre and post 9/11, if you need an example of how racism creates new ways of being. You know, when I was a kid, it wasn't prejudice and bias towards transgender folks. And now there's a whole new field, you know, and I guarantee when my children grow up, there will be a whole new group of people or new way of viewing people and a new racism to fight. And so it becomes really critical that we're thinking about ways to reduce it.
You mentioned children, so I want to pick up on that. How should parents, Black and white, brown, in between, how should they be using this moment? This moment where we have these images out here, this moment where there is the conversation and where there is such a public expression of pain and anguish and violence as well that we have also seen. How should parents be responding to this moment with their children?
So they need to be leaning in and having these conversations. And I think a really short, succinct way is saying, we live in a world where a lot of people are having this infection that is called racism. It's bullying. and some people didn't know it was happening. And now more people are realizing that people are being bullied because of the skin and the body they live in. In this family, we do not tolerate that. And we speak up for people who need to have a voice in the world, because we're lucky that some people gave us a voice, even though we maybe didn't earn that voice. And so we're going to use our voice to help people. And so I think it's really important that we lean in and make definitive statements about racism is not right. And it's not a soft statement. It's very clear, just like you would tell your child, go to bed. It wouldn't be a soft statement. It's very firm.
Such a fascinating conversation. Dr. Crawford, so grateful for your time. Thank you. I know we'll have you back in the days ahead and the weeks ahead, because this is a conversation that must go on. So thank you for today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. Take care. So, as I was saying, we are looking at the outbreak of, I don't know if it's an outbreak, the epidemic that is racism here in the United States, but also the outbreak of coronavirus. They are merged into one in this moment here in the United States. I want to take a moment and look beyond these borders at the scale of the outbreak on the continent in Africa. As always, we want to get you the very latest in terms of total number of cases. Let's put up a graphic on the screen so you can see the big number that you have to keep in mind right now. There are currently almost 200,000 confirmed coronavirus cases in Africa, 197,631 to be precise. Of those, 105,548 are active. When we look at the deaths on the continent, still so comparatively lower than what's happening in the United States. On the continent of Africa, 1.3 billion people almost, deaths have gone just past the 5,000 mark. So right now, 5,392. You look at here in the United States, we're well over 100,000 deaths. Let me bring you some regional perspective now. Looking at Northern Africa, Egypt remains the most impacted country. Confirmed cases 35,444. Deaths there 1,271. Egypt has tripled the number of cases in Algeria, which is the next most impacted country in that region. Algeria currently 10,382 cases. Number of deaths 724. Algeria's numbers continue to go up, but the gradual reopening is underway. A number of shops are up and running, and they expect the whole country to be open by middle of this month. Turning to Central Africa, Cameroon is the most impacted country, 8,312 cases with 212 deaths presently. We're also watching DRC. If you're watching yesterday, you know that they're battling not just coronavirus, but also Ebola. And that outbreak is expanding in DRC. At present, 4,259 cases in DRC with 90 deaths. Neighboring Burundi in the news today because their outgoing president, Pierre Nkurunziza, died suddenly after suffering a cardiac arrest. He was 55 and he was the outgoing president, about to step down in a matter of months. He has passed away and a week of national mourning has been declared. That is the situation there in Burundi. West Africa, Nigeria. The numbers continue to go up, but we are hearing from health officials now beginning to say definitively that some of those deaths that we've been seeing in Kano in the north are indeed linked to COVID-19. Total cases in Nigeria, 12,801. Looking at the deaths, 361. Ghana, they are fast approaching 10,000 cases. Total cases right now, 9,910. Deaths just under 50. Looking at my home country of Sierra Leone, gone past 1,000 there, to be precise. Confirmed number of cases in Sierra Leone. We're looking at 1,025 and 50 deaths. East Africa quickly. Let's go to East Africa, and we're looking at Sudan. The numbers in Sudan are still worrisome. Over 6,000 cases, deaths 372. In Kenya, restrictions remain in place. Almost 3,000 cases there, 88 deaths. Let's finish up in the southern half of the continent. South Africa's numbers far out in front in that region and on the continent as a whole. Over 50,000 cases in South Africa. I keep telling you that the peak is expected in August. Deaths over 1,000. Zambia's numbers are past 1,000 cases now. Madagascar. You know, I'm always talking about Madagascar on the show. Talk of that herbal tonic has quietened somewhat muted in Madagascar. Haven't heard them talking about that. They currently have 1,138 cases, 9 deaths there. A quick check of the coronavirus case numbers from Africa for you. All right, let's move on. We're talking about Africa and the number of COVID cases, but it still remains very much a major issue here in the United States. But it's important to acknowledge that COVID is impacting Black communities disproportionately. We are being impacted. We are dying at far greater numbers than our white counterparts. When you look at the data, there is a COVID racial data tracker, which collects, publishes, and analyzes racial data of this pandemic here in this country. Black people are just 13% of this country, but make up 24% of the COVID-19 deaths. In some parts of the country, it's even higher than that. We are dying at a rate of 2 times higher than our white counterparts. We want to try and understand this disparity and really get to grips with it. We've heard people say over and over again that the reason we are dying in disproportionate numbers is because of our comorbidities, the underlying conditions. I guess my question is, how did we get there? Let's have that conversation. Joining us now is Dr. Patrice Harris. She's the former president of the American Medical Association. She joins us now from Atlanta. Dr. Harris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. You have been an important voice throughout all of this. I've watched you a great deal. As we continue to understand these numbers and how the Black community is being impacted, as we look at these numbers of people out for the protests and worry that, you know, it could potentially be an event that is a super spreading event, which could ultimately impact Black people again in larger numbers. Talk to me about how we got to the place where we have a disproportionate share of the comorbidities.
Well, thank you. And that is a very important question because it, I hope, reminds people not to start and stop with Black people are dying in higher numbers. That is the beginning of the conversation. And so I really appreciate your, how did we get here? And so, you know, the other issues, right, that we are dealing with right now with the police violence and all of the issues around racism. And we can certainly appreciate interpersonal racism, but we also have to appreciate structural racism and 400 years of policies and practices and a culture that have led to us getting to where we are today. So if you just start with the disproportionate impact of hypertension and diabetes, yes. But again, we cannot just blame the folks, blame the victim, if you will, but blame the folks who have these diseases. We need to look at why. And there are, again, many issues why. Lack of access to health care, right? Lack of access to fresh, nutritious foods, lack of transportation, all of these determinants of health. You know, we looked here in Atlanta, we talk a lot about zip codes. Mm-hmm. And we know that where you live certainly impacts your life expectancy. And you can really overlay past discriminatory housing policies with the same zip codes where we see most of the disease burden regarding these chronic diseases. So again, we can start with the chronic diseases, but we have to go back further and try to dig deep into many of the policies that are the reasons why we are where we are today. And then if we look at COVID-19, we know that many of the folks who are on the front lines, many of the essential workers were Black and brown, so they were, of course, exposed more. And so time of exposure does increase your risk of having the disorder, certainly of having the disease, and certainly not having the privilege, that some of us had to work from home and stay home, and not having the privilege of a 5-bedroom house where you could, even quarantine. So all of these issues contribute to where we are today.
So when we look at where we are today, and when we look at the data, I mean, what are we seeing in terms of how it breaks down in terms of age? I mean, is this something that is affecting basically across the community, regardless of age? I mean, what are we seeing in terms of when we actually pass the data?
Yeah, so we have to be clear here because this was an early myth that I had to dispel. First of all, another early myth that I had to dispel, not really in my role as president of the AMA, I was at the time, was that African Americans, Black people could not become infected with COVID. And another early myth where children could not become infected. And so now we know everyone is equally at risk for transmission or becoming infected. But certainly we have seen worse consequences in those who are older than 60, and of course more deaths and hospitalization in those over 80. But then you have to overlay that with, again, the number of deaths disproportionate impacted African Americans. So if you overlay all of those risk factors, certainly age is a factor, but you can die from this disease if you are younger.
Let me ask you this. When we look at, and I don't know if this has been done in terms of looking at it comparatively, but I mean, it's not just Black people who have these underlying conditions, right, of diabetes and hypertension and high blood pressure. If you were to lay Black people with those conditions next to white people who have the same conditions, do you see a difference in terms of outcome? I.e., I'm asking really about the difference in care that people are getting when they go to hospital.
So we don't have that data. As we get through this crisis, we would hope that we would certainly look at that data. And, I want to make another point about even having the data regarding this disproportionate impact. Originally, only about 5 states were even collecting the data. And oftentimes, as I've said to my colleagues, usually this data regarding race and ethnicity is an afterthought. After the crisis, we look back and say, oh, my goodness, this was affecting. So I think there is some good news in that we are looking at that data again during the midst of the pandemic. But the American Medical Association and others really had to call attention to the need to collect that data. Originally, only 5 states were collecting that data, now 48 states. I do also want to point out regarding this impact on our Native American population. So much death and disease burden in our Native American population. So we also need to point that out. But the comparative data that you ask about is not yet done. And so that will be something that we will need to look at as we get through this pandemic.
And very quickly, before I let you go, in terms of the federal government's response, I mean, it has been what it has been on many fronts. Is this somewhere that you expect? Is this an area where you expect them to be taking a greater lead than they have, or really are you actually just looking at the state level right now? What's your thinking about the way forward?
Absolutely. The federal government does have the responsibility. The federal government could best coordinate our response. Can best coordinate preparedness. Listen, we are worried about a second wave in the fall, but unfortunately, we do know that now really the states and the governors are really leading on this, and so we should continue to call on our federal government to coordinate our response. We are worried about PPE, that is the personal protective equipment still, and now that physician practices are opening. And we are attending to the neglected needs of many of our patients. We need more and more PPE, and we really need some regional, at least, coordination. But right now, we are relying on our governors, and the leadership is happening at the states. But we should continue to request and ask our federal government to lead on this.
Dr. Harris, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. I hope you'll come back and speak to us again soon.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Be safe.
You too.
Here on the show, we try to grapple with the real issues, the underlying issues, some of the questions that don't get to be asked in places as to how we got here. I want to say thank you for everyone who's with us right now, who's tuned in and who's writing in with their comments. Many of you are here. I see many familiar names, and I want to say thank you for always being with me during this week. We have people here from Hamburg, Germany. Conta M. Conde is here. Bangro Samura from Sierra Leone. We are David Sesay from Amsterdam. The Sesays, we're everywhere. Cecilia Green-Fode, thanking everyone for the support of the platform. Thank you. People in from London, from Cardiff, I want to see what else is going on here as I read through. Cecilia Green-Foote. Yes, Aisha, we're proud of the girls. My daughter also came out with friends. This is in reference to Tash and the protests in London. She says, we're proud of the girls. My daughter also came out with friends to show solidarity and truly enthusiastic about the cause and how it affects us as Black people in the UK. Black communities here are mostly treated unfairly at school and at work or in business. It's sad, but it's a fact so clearly, thanks to our brave young children here in the United Kingdom. Adejo Victor David says, the issue of racism is really deep. I never took it seriously until I got to the UK. Mabinti Sesay says, racism in the UK, another Sesay, hello. Racism in the UK is very subtle and systematic. This move is helping people to ask more questions and discuss about racism. Cecilia Greenfoote sending in more comments, saying that as an educator in the UK, it has been remarkable to enable you to work amongst all races, to embrace and celebrate your Blackness. Again, people talking, picking up on the conversation I had with Dr. Crawford. Utere Gorta says, we're not at the healing stage yet. Again, I mean, the question is, when do we start the healing? That's up for debate. Or do we seek change and try to heal simultaneously? Is that even possible? Aminata Radia says a lot of defenseless listening has to happen. And we've heard that over and over again, the need for people to listen, the need for people to actually listen without fear of judgment, listen and not make it about them, just hear our stories. That is absolutely important. And the last message that I'm going to read out, Auntie Soe Bassi says, the sad thing about racism is the message it sends to our children. It doesn't matter if you're educated, rich, law-abiding, you're still treated with discrimination. Our kids are asking, if you tell us to do everything right and still get treated as trash, what can we do? It is sad. We all need to work together to make this change. We all need to call it out where we see it, and we all need to force these honest conversations. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you who wrote in. If I didn't get to your message, apologies, but I appreciate every message and you being with me here today. We are keeping an eye on 5 major stories for you. Let me run through them. Coronavirus cases in Libya are on the rise. In Libya, there is a surge in confirmed cases, according to the National Center for Disease Control, and authorities are pointing the finger at the southern city of Sebha as the source. After weeks of only having a few dozen cases in the country, now they are saying that they found 90 cases in that city, and local health officials believe that the surge is due to the repatriation of nationals who'd been stranded abroad. Local health officials, international agencies have long said that they are concerned about Libya because any significant spike in cases or any major wave of cases could be disastrous, given the fact that the country is racked with instability due to conflict. Second story that we're watching for you, out of China. And China and the rest of the world, as you know, is racing to develop a vaccine. And China is now saying that whatever they get as a result for future trials will be something that they share with the world. According to the country's Minister of Science and Technology, Wang Zhigang, he says, when a Chinese vaccine is ready for application after research and development and clinical trials, we will implement the commitment made by Chinese President Xi Jinping at the 73rd World Health Assembly, providing the vaccine to the world as global public goods. This is a really important point, something we should all keep an eye on. There's huge concerns that a vaccine, if it emerges, it will become a proprietary battle, and that it will be something that is wrapped up in efforts to make profit, and some people will get left out, priced out of the market. China is now saying at this stage, if they get one, they'll provide it to the world as global public goods. We shall watch and see if that happens. Let's turn our attention to WHO. Because after for many months saying that asymptomatic people were a huge threat and were significantly responsible for spreading coronavirus, they're now rolling that back in the last day or so. They're now saying that it is very rare for patients who do not show symptoms of coronavirus to actually spread the virus. Like I said, we have all been dealing with the statements they put out for weeks now, saying exactly the opposite. Some scientists are pushing back and are questioning whether they actually mean pre-symptomatic people as opposed to asymptomatic people. Nonetheless, a leading WHO official is urging governments around the world to focus on detecting and tracing, detecting and isolating people who are showing symptoms and tracing anyone who may have come into contact with them. So they're basically asking for people to shift the attention away from asymptomatic people. This is a developing story that we're going to watch for you. South Africa. South Africa is going to pay some Cuban doctors, to be precise, almost 200 Cuban doctors, $14 million. You may remember that I told you a few months ago now that South Africa had invited 187 physicians from Cuba to aid them in the outbreak in the country. Well, now we're learning that they're paying them $14 million for that. They're saying that it has a lot to do with their experience, but many people in South Africa are unhappy about that. Final story that we're watching for you out of Tunisia, and their COVID lockdown is over. The Tunisian president has ordered that the months-long curfew be wrapped up, and says the country is getting back to normal. Shops, businesses, mosques, cafes, all open. The government is claiming success in defeating COVID. Those are the 5 major stories we are watching for you, and we will bring you the latest as those develop in the hours ahead. All right, turning our attention now to Mali. If you want something done well, if you want it done right, do it yourself. And that is exactly the attitude of my next guest. He's part of a group of engineers who answered the call of the Malian government when they announced to the public that they had less than 60 ventilators in the country as they prepared for the possible arrival of COVID-19 in that country. The young men stepped up and they created their own homemade invention. I spoke to one of them, Mahamadou Kone, a short time ago. He joined me from Bamako, Mali. Take a listen to his extraordinary story. Mahamadou Kone joins me now from Bamako, Mali. Mahamadou, welcome.
Welcome.
So Mali has less than 60 ventilators in the entire country. You and your partners at Donifab decided to do something about it. You came up with an idea to help. Pick up the story from there. What did you decide to do?
Well, like you said, we have a lack of ventilators or artificial respirators here in Mali, and there were an official communication from the government who actually exposed the problem. If there are enterprises or startups that could help the government to build respirators. And this is from there we have the idea if we could do something like that, because our lab is focused on personal gadgets and anything that is that we can imagine in technology. So that's how we decided to give it a try.
And so you decided, I mean, as you do, you decided you were going to create these respirators. Talk to me about the process of doing that. I mean, are you guys trained engineers, at least in medical engineering? I mean, how difficult was this?
Well, I have to say we are autodidacts mainly. We have one engineer who specializes in mobile app development, but the rest of us, we are 4 by the way, the rest of us are autodidacts. So we are self-taught programmers.
Wow.
So what we've done is we made researches on artificial respirators, the requirements. And we have seen that we do have the backgrounds to build that kind of thing. And we started making our own researches. Like you said, we started asking experts on how it works, the doctors and all that. So based on all the information we have collected, we built the first version of the respirator. And we have brought to the hospital of Pointe, which is one of the biggest hospitals here in Bamako, to be tested. And the medical experts have tested it, not on actual patients, but they have simulated a test, and they had a lot of recommendations about the first version. We didn't have quite a few things, and they had those recommendations. We took note, and actually we're working on the version 2 of the respirator.
So that's where you're at now, version 2, working on that second prototype. And one assumes that you'll get there sooner rather than later, that everything will be ready and it will be approved by hospitals and other institutions. What's your capacity to produce these, at a large scale?
Well, the laboratory does not specialize in producing things at a large scale. We generally do small scale producing. But what we are planning to do is to have a separate unit of production. This could be an entire enterprise at its own. If the respirator is validated, we plan to have an enterprise or a company at its own, which will take care of producing at a large scale. First, we're gonna have we have member who will take care of those companies.
Your efforts have gathered attention around the world, which is how we heard about you. I mean, what's the response there in Mali to what you're doing?
Well, we do have positive response, whether it be from the population or from the doctors themselves. They were proud to see at least a version of a respirator, which is a hope for the country. And they have been so much motivated that we actually had a crowdfunding campaign going on, and a lot of people had helped us with all they could do. Because now we have a mission. Our mission is to offer 20 respirators to the hospital of Pointe as a present. We don't ask them anything. We just want to build those 20 respirators and give as a gift to the hospital of Pointe.
And what is the situation there in Mali right now when it comes to COVID cases?
COVID cases, they are rising, unfortunately. The statistics shows that they are rising. We have over 1,000 cases right now, which is nothing compared to some countries, but here it means a lot.
So, Mohamedou, is your lab working on other inventions, other solutions that are needed to problems that have arisen during this pandemic?
Yes, we do. And in fact, we don't. The respirator is not the first solution that we built. We didn't even think of the respirator at the beginning. What we actually did was building a hand wash machine, automatic hand wash machine, because that was the prevention stage. We didn't have any cases when we started building those. So we imagined this hand wash machine to be contact-free, contactless, because what we used to have here, there is the tub about like kind of a bathtub that you turn to wash the hands and all that. So there is a high risk of contamination in the in chain. So we wanted to have a solution to stop that. So we thought of a hand washing machine which will be contactless, and that was the first product. And we actually are producing these even right now. People are ordering them from all over, and we're building for them.
That's amazing. So when you hear people say that Africa doesn't have the talent, it doesn't have the brains, the capacity to innovate, to create, solutions for itself or for the problems that we have. When you hear that, what goes through your mind?
Well, I just think maybe they haven't seen any innovation from their perspective. They haven't seen it yet. Maybe otherwise We do have innovations. We do have inventions. We do have all the things that you just said. Maybe those people don't. I just think they don't know. Maybe.
So, Amadou, what do you see as the potential here for Africa's transformation when you look at tech and you look at the kind of work people like yourself and other young people are doing right now in Africa?
Well, what I see is we'll have a great future. We'll have a great future, especially if the young guys like me engage a lot into technology. Because the problem is a lot of young guys when they engage into technologies, they end up going. They think this is not for Africa. They just think it is too hard. They want to do something else. So I genuinely hope that all the actions that are being taken, and we are not the only young guys doing great things in Africa. There are other tons of other young guys doing great things, and I hope this will inspire them to focus at least on technology and try to innovate.
Yeah, agreed. I'm sure that we know there are lots of young guys and young girls out there doing this important work. Mahamadou Kone joining us there from Bamako, Mali. Congratulations on getting to the second prototype. I'm fully sending you all the luck and full of belief that you will get that validated and up and running. Congrats for where you are at now and good luck for the future.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Be safe.
All right.
I'm so proud of him. I'm overwhelmed. I can barely speak because think about it. They are a group of young men who are self-taught. Somebody asked how come he's speaking English. He taught himself. They're amazing. They are the future of the continent, and I'm so proud that I was able to bring them your story, or their story rather. That does it for today's show. Whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, thank you for giving up some of your day to me and getting a different perspective on some of the stories dominating the headlines. I'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Till then, take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. And